This spring and summer, I've got my son's graduation party, a bridal shower to plan, and a few summer birthdays for my family. But hosting can feel so overwhelming. Pretty Little Gatherings offers decor kits and tablescapes that are intentionally designed and handmade so everything works together. No second guessing, and definitely no running around to various stores to purchase what you need. Just open the box and host your celebration. Visit prettylittlegathering.com and subscribe to their newsletter for updates on their spring and summer decor options. And definitely follow them on social media platforms. It's our weekly politics episode, and today we're talking about Mayor Cherelle Parker's budget preview. Plus, City Council plans to hold a hearing next month to limit ICE operations and new tenant protections. Our political contributor, Lauren Vidas, is here to break it all down. It's Wednesday, March 11th. I'm Trenae Nuri, and we're talking politics. Hey, Lauren.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Tomorrow is a big day for the city because tomorrow at 10 a.m., Mayor Parker will deliver her third budget address to City Council, which she will basically detail her vision for spending in the city and what she's going to be committed to for the fiscal 2027 budget. Last year, Council approved a $6.8 billion budget focused on economic growth, the home initiative, public safety, quality of life issues, and as well as education. And Lauren, we have heard Mayor Parker tout her One Philly slogan, a safer, cleaner, greener city with access to economic opportunity for all. Is Parker keeping with these themes, or is she switching it up a little bit? What's her top priorities?
I think, if anything, the mayor has been very consistent in her messaging since she came into office and has been very focused on hitting her campaign promises. And one of those promises, as you mentioned, was the home initiative. And I think we're going to continue to see that initiative play a major role in her budget this year. The budget address, it's like the Super Bowl for city finance nerds, right? Mm-hmm. It's where the mayor outlines her spending priorities for the upcoming fiscal year. It's where she has the opportunity to tout her successes of the last year. Where did last year's money go and what were the results of that spending? I think this year we're going to see a big focus on 2026, right? Even though the fiscal year technically starts July 1st, I think the mayor understands that the city of Philadelphia is going to be in the spotlight in 2026 and is going to be continue investments in making sure that it puts its best foot forward and that it also maximizes and reaps all of the benefits that increased tourism and visitors has to offer to the city. So I think we're going to continue to see her focus on affordability in housing, in job creation, and continued improvement to quality of life issues within the neighborhoods, as well as tout her success in seeing one of the largest drops in Philadelphia's crime rate in recent history. I mean, kudos to her, kudos to her administration and the leadership there. That's a major story that I think we don't talk about because it's a positive story.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it is a historic drop here in the city, but it's also a historic drop nationally in terms of the numbers when we talk about homicides and shootings. And to your point, I think you were making, I read in the Philadelphia Citizen that even with the historic drop, Parker's administration doesn't have this kind of like mission accomplished moment. They are still continuing to focus on quality of life issues. So can you shed some light on how the administration is approaching crime, gun violence in this budget? Will we see increases in the police department?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at one of the challenges and one of the priorities for the mayor has been ensuring that we have enough officers on the ground in the police force. And hiring has been a major challenge for the city of Philadelphia, not just in the PPD, but across departments. So I know that part of her focus on reducing crime was to make sure that we had enough folks within the police force, but also changing how they interact within communities, right? Getting officers out of cars and back walking beats and back on bikes where they're having regular interactions and building trust with the community. I think trying to rebuild trust between the police force and the community has been something that she's really prioritized, and the chief of police has really prioritized.
I was just about to mention that because he came out with that 5-year strategic plan, which he wants Philadelphians to participate in and let the police department know like how they can do a better job.
Yeah, and I think, frankly, of all of the decisions that she's made since she became mayor, naming Commissioner Bethel to the top job is probably one of the most impactful and important decisions she's made. And I think we are reaping the dividends of that as a city with the drop in crime rate. Now, as you mentioned, the crime rates dropped nationally. Other cities have also experienced it. So it's really hard to kind of pull out like which decisions resulted in the impact that we're seeing. Right. But when you're a mayor and things aren't going right, you catch all the flack for it. So she should absolutely be taking as much praise and running with that as things turn out positively, right? Because it works both ways.
How are the city's finances these days? Are we in good standing? And will we be close to that $6.8 billion budget, or are things going to be increasing?
I think you'll probably see the budget creep up a little bit. This might be the year that we hit $7 billion. It's really hard to tell in advance until those numbers are released. But generally, you do see increases year to year, especially when tax revenue is relatively stable and you're not in a recession. That's usually when you see the budget number go down. So I think the fiscal health of the city is strong for Philadelphia. Obviously, when you compare us to some of our peer cities, we are not as competitive as an economic engine. But for Philadelphia, we're in pretty good shape. The mayor recently held a press conference where she touted the fiscal health of the city's pension fund. For folks who might not be as familiar with it, basically the pension fund is the fund that the city uses to pay the benefits to former employees, to retirees. And for many years, the pension fund was underfunded to the point where we maybe had 50 cents for every dollar we owed. And so the city has really been focused on increasing the health of the fund. And the reason that's important is that once the fund is healthy and hits a certain fiscal stability point, then the amount of money the city has to dump into it on an annual basis goes down, right? So think of it as like your credit card payment that you have to make each month, that minimum. Once that credit card's paid off or almost paid off, you don't have to spend as much on a month-to-month basis. And that's important because that frees up a ton of resources and a ton of dollars that can be reinvested into direct city services rather than reinvested into paying for the folks that previously delivered those services 20, 30 years ago.
I want to talk about Mayor Parker's long-term strategies. So we're at that halfway point in her term. And, we've seen that the home initiative, for example, her $2 billion housing initiative to build and preserve 30,000 units, it's taken multiple years to even get that first shovel in the ground, so to speak. So given that, it takes some time for things to kind of change over, for us to kind of see or reap the benefits, given that she has 2 years, at least in this first term, any insight on how she's thinking of long-term strategies?
Yeah, I think that the mayor understands that she made some pretty bold promises when she ran for office and that they're not going to be accomplished in year one, and has taken sort of a consistent approach to just kind of chipping away at those projects. You mentioned the home initiative. That was really the focus of her year one budget address, was this very bold plan to build or create 30,000 units of housing. And she has continued with that. They're calling it the phase 2 of the plan. The mayor has sent over legislation to council that would amend the zoning code with the idea of increasing density and focusing on transit-oriented communities, is what she's calling them. So I think this mayor really understands that things aren't going to happen overnight, right? It's going to take time for the money to flow, to get into the hands of builders to get those housing units created. But, if these problems were easy to solve and could be solved overnight, we would have solved them by now, right? We're only left with hard problems.
What else do you think that Mayor Parker wants to prioritize in this budget?
I think one of the things that I've been hearing is that she really wants to make some investments in programs to help not only, we hear a lot about affordable housing, but there are some folks that just any housing is out of their financial league. And I'm talking about the homeless population. So I know she's looking to make investments in addressing the homeless issue in the city, getting folks into housing, getting them into the system so that they can have the mental health services or addiction services that they need, and taking a holistic approach to how do we ensure that every Philadelphian has a safe and warm place to go at night.
I'm also thinking about, we know that Mayor Parker is close with certain unions. So I'm thinking, how are unions, how are community groups, how are advocates, and even council, how are they going to respond to this budget? Have you heard any concerns from folks or any insight on initiatives that they hope Parker pays closer attention to?
I think there are a lot of small business owners who are feeling the sting of there was a tax exemption for essentially small business owners. I think if you made under $100,000 a year, you were exempt from paying certain city taxes. And there was a whole lawsuit against the city about that. And then the city ended up getting rid of that exemption because of the lawsuit. So folks who have been told, hey, we're going to reduce taxes, actually saw their taxes go up because they were no longer exempt. So I think that's a concern that the city is looking at. How do we address this? How do we, again, make sure that we're supporting small business growth in the city of Philadelphia? I think in terms of, the trades and the unions, attracting development is a major piece of what, keeps their folks employed and on the job. And I think you've seen the mayor announce some initiatives around that and continue to kind of focus on that with her Philadelphia Prime initiative, which is essentially trying to figure out how do we identify projects that are going to create jobs, that are going to add to the tax revenue and make significant investment in the city of Philadelphia, and ensure that we cut through as much red tape as possible to get those shovels in the ground and those ribbons cut and doors open and people at their desks or in their homes. And so I think, again, the mayor is sort of taking like a longer term approach of trying to eliminate some of these barriers to investment in the city of Philadelphia.
We've got more politics after the break.
Hi, I'm David Plotz. I'm the CEO of CityCast, a podcast network that includes this show you're listening to, and also 12 other CityCasts in 12 other cities. And each one knows their city as well as your local team knows yours. So isn't it time we connected them? Don't you want to know how they're tackling their bike lane problems and housing challenges and sidewalk dog poop crises? That's why I'm hosting a new podcast called Your City Could Be Better. Because it could be. Every week, I'll chat with a different host in our CityCast network about what their cities are doing right and wrong, the weird things they're trying, and the surprising successes, so that we can all learn how to make our cities a little bit better. Listen to Your City Could Be Better on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, City Council is setting aside a whole day next month, Monday, April 6th, to talk through proposed legislation about ICE with the Parker administration. And this kind of all goes back. We had a conversation with Councilmember Rue Landau and Councilmember Kendra Brooks about some of the bills that would limit immigration and customs enforcement officers with city officials and how they conduct their operations. The bills also ban agents' use of masks and unmarked vehicles. It restricts their ability to operate on city-owned spaces and prevents Philly police and other city agencies from assisting with immigration enforcement. But Lauren, what is the goal of the hearing?
City Council can hold two types of hearings. The first is just essentially an informational hearing where they invite the public to speak and take testimony. And it's really to kind of like learn or investigate a subject.
Okay.
The second type of hearing that they'll hold is essentially part of the mandated legislative process required to pass something into law. So the hearings that we're looking at on April 6th are part of that legislative lawmaking process. So council will hold a hearing before the Committee of the Whole, which is all 17 members. They will call up the pieces of legislation and they will take testimony on this legislation. And eventually, at the end of this hearing, they will decide whether to advance that legislation to a final vote before council. So they will either give it a favorable recommendation or a unfavorable recommendation. If this legislation receives a vote at that hearing, it will then be forwarded on to the body for a final vote later down the line. So this April 6th hearing is actually not just informational, but it's them considering and vetting the legislation that was introduced earlier this year.
Because there's also a sense of urgency in the timing of all this. But before we get into that, can people attend this April 6th hearing?
Absolutely. Any public hearing of council is open to the general public. If you are interested in signing up to testify on this hearing and sharing your stories or providing feedback on the legislation, you can reach out to the City Council Chief Clerk's office and get on the testimony list.
Now, let's talk about that urgency because as we know, we've seen ICE operations happen in broad daylight here in the city. There's also been 2 new ICE detention centers proposed in Pennsylvania. And we have a lot of people coming into the city for sporting events from around the world and the celebrations of America's 250th anniversary this year. But the question has still remained, what power does City Council have to step in on federal department operations like ICE?
Yeah, so the city is relatively limited in how it can regulate the state or how it can regulate the federal government, right? So I think the common theme of this legislation is really limiting the city's cooperation with these agencies, limiting the use of public land that is city-owned land for staging areas, creating and carving out safe spaces within the city where folks don't have to worry about raids happening or staging locations. So the city's power, I think, is questionable in some of these bills as to how far they can go. But again, that's the point of these public hearings, is to have these conversations. And usually what will happen is the law department will offer an opinion and say, hey, we think this part of the bill is stuff that we are legally entitled or have authority to do. We think maybe this goes too far. I think this issue probably more so than a number of others where the city's had questionable legal authority. I don't know if the city necessarily cares whether it has the authority or not in some of these cases. I think City Council wants to send a strong message not only to the federal agencies, but also to its residents that like we're gonna take a stand here. May not hold up in court, but it is the morally proper thing to do. So I think it's as much about the moral authority of the city in enacting these laws versus the legal authority of the city in doing so.
Interesting, because it seems like if it's just about city-owned land, that gets like choppy. Like, oh, if I'm on this side of the street, I'm safe, but if I'm on the other side, I'm not.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, frankly, at the end of the day, I think when you look at some of the raids and some of the behavior of these agents across the country, I'm not sure whether they care about a law being enacted or not, right? There are laws in place and there are things governing their behavior. And in a number of cases, they've absolutely ignored existing enforceable law. So, again, I think it's as much about the symbolism as it is the ability to enforce it.
Now, these conversations at the hearing will also include the Parker administration. And we know that 15 of the 17 council members have already pledged support, and that it is a veto-proof majority. Explain what that all means.
So there are 17 members of city council. In order to pass a bill, you only need 9 members, right? So in order for a bill to become law, you only need 9 members to vote yes for it. If a mayor vetoes a bill, you need 12 members to override the veto. So when they say something's a veto-proof majority that's sponsored it, it means it's had more than 12 members sponsor the bill.
We've talked about this, you and I, on the show about, just Parker's approach to discussing this issue, discussing even President Donald Trump at times. But we have seen Mayor Parker get very vocal about city issues in the past few months. And I'm thinking about the president's house legal debate. I'm thinking about even the second snowstorm. We saw her out making sure she was shaking hands, making sure those streets were plowed. But when it comes to this federal issue, how will she respond, or how will her administration respond to this hearing?
Yeah, I think you'll probably see them sort of walk the line a little bit, and express support for our immigrant communities, express disdain at the sort of lawless operations and violent behavior we've seen by some agents across the country. But I think you will also see them give their legal opinion as to what the city can and cannot do and what council has the authority to do or not do. And at the end of the day, should this legislation pass and it lands on her desk for her signature, her choice isn't to either sign it or to veto it. The mayor has a third option, which is to just do nothing, right? And you see this done a lot when council has passed a bill that the mayor disagrees with a veto-proof majority, rather than do a veto and then force an override vote and, get essentially beaten twice on it. If the mayor just leaves the bill unsigned, it will become law within 10 days.
But that's making a statement, though, too.
Right. It's making a statement, and the mayor will often communicate when she returns the bill to council. In some cases, she'll just say, hey, due to a legal opinion, the law department's advised me not to sign this, and just leave it at that. Okay. In some cases, she'll say, I strongly disagree with this bill, but I recognize you have the votes to override it, and leave it unsigned. And in some cases, she'll say, I know you're going to override me, but I'm still going to veto this because I disagree with you that strongly.
She has said that she will uphold the executive order that was passed by former Mayor Jim Kenney that limits cooperation with ICE. So what do you think about that? Yeah.
I think if you look at a lot of the legislation that was the ICE package, it's codifying the mayor's executive order, right? The mayor's executive order is not law. The mayor could change her mind tomorrow and undo an executive order that's on the books. And I think what council is saying is like, hey, no, this is a good executive order, but we want to see it enshrined into law. We want to see it made permanent and part of the Philadelphia Code. So yeah, I think where the friction between the administration and council might be is the things that go beyond those executive orders, the things that are beyond the scope of what the city can and cannot control in terms of the data it shares, the cooperation it provides, the properties that are used. Once you start trying to kind of regulate individual conduct outside of the city, I think that's where there might be some friction.
All right, we've got more after the break. Let's talk about the tenant rights bills that we saw in council last week. There's some legislation around how to protect residential tenants. And there was a legislative package put together by Councilmember Nick O'Rourke. Let's talk about this. So one of them is meant to protect tenants from retaliation if they complain about the conditions of their home, if it's not enough heat, if there's mold, if there's rodents and pests. Let's break that down a little bit.
Yeah, so I think the legislative package introduced by Councilman O'Rourke is really designed to try to improve the quality of existing housing, right? We all know how housing costs have skyrocketed, and it's sort of put landlords in a position where maybe they feel because there's so much demand for housing that they don't have to be on top of their game, right? And obviously this is not every landlord is like this. You have
Right.
good landlords, you have bad landlords. It's a mixed bag, as with everything. And I think what Councilmember O'Rourke is trying to do here is give tenants the ability to fight for their rights under essentially state law with, things like habitability and things like that they're entitled to under state law, without having to worry about, is this landlord going to evict me because I complain that, I have mice coming up through my stove. So that's, I think, where his sort of motivation is at, is ensuring that people who are paying good money for their housing have, the basic standards that the law requires.
Another one of the bills is meant to increase regular inspections of rental properties. And this is like a proposal to get the Department of Licenses and Inspections involved. But does this department have the bandwidth to make inspections of a bunch of residential properties in the city? Because they're already stretched thin.
Yeah, and it's a great question. Yeah, so right now, the housing inspections, it almost operates on a complaint basis, right? My window's broken. I have all these violations. Can you just get somebody out to kind of like get my landlord off their duff to fix this stuff? And what Councilmember O'Rourke's bill would do, it would require sort of proactive inspections, where licensed inspections would regularly inspect rental housing throughout the city. I don't think anybody would disagree that L&I is stretched thin. It's
Right.
difficult. There are wait times for building inspections, things like that. It is a department that has a tremendous portfolio that it is responsible for. So the idea of doing these proactive inspections is probably going to entail needing to expand L&I's workforce significantly. And with significant hiring comes, additional expenses and things like that. So this is going to be a mandate that's going to require a lot more investment into the department to be able to meet.
Now, Mayor Parker has had a focus on housing, obviously through the home initiative. So does this sound like something that she would support?
I would say that the administration is generally frowns upon unfunded mandates for their departments. If you're going to be expanding sort of responsibilities, the city does like to see, financial or fiscal support for that. So I think there might be some tension there. There's also the idea of whether we need to switch from a complaint-based system to a proactive system, where if tenants can just call the city and have somebody come out and inspect when there is a problem, does it make sense to be sending people out to inspect things when there isn't a problem, is probably a question that the administration has. Or should those resources be directed elsewhere to trying to resolve existing issues rather than trying to find new issues to resolve?
I mean, that makes sense to me. Now, I saw some videos of what I assume were opponents to these bills. I'm guessing these were landlords. There was a lot of yelling and expressing of feelings in council chambers. So how are these bills being received from the tenant side and the landlord side?
Yeah, I mean, so I think what people need to realize is that this is a debate that's been happening in the city for over 20 years now, right?
A long time, yes.
We have been, this is not anybody's first rodeo when it comes to this type of legislation. Councilmember Rick Mariano, on his way out the door to federal prison, passed a big tenants' rights package of bills. Good cause eviction was brought up, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago. And so I think the frustration that you're seeing is that there's been a lot of negotiation and compromise and work done around this stuff. And I think from the landlord side, folks are frustrated because they feel like they spent years negotiating and compromise, working with the city to try to figure out a system that addresses tenants' concerns while at the same time not creating like extra crazy burdens for landlords. And and now we're back at not square one, but maybe square two. So I think there's some frustration there. And then from the tenant side, you have the tenant say, okay, well, we reached this compromise, but like conditions aren't getting better. So we need to go back to square two. And it's about housing, right? It's about like an absolutely basic human need and the quality of that housing. So it's going to be emotional because it's folks' homes or their livelihood, two of the most important things to them. The last time we saw this huge kind of omnibus amendment to the city's landlord-tenant protections, there was a lawsuit, and I would not be surprised if this ends up back in court again. So I don't think this will be the last time you and I will be talking about tenant protections and landlord responsibility on this show.
All right, Lauren, Vidas, thank you so much for breaking this all down on CityCast Philly today.
Thank you for having me.
And make sure you stay connected with Lauren in the City Hall roll call. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed this episode about local politics, share this with a friend. Also, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. And don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Philly neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.